Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown podcast featuring PennLive Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh, who's coming to us from a special location for a special edition of the podcast. And I want to set this up and then we're going to turn it right over to Nick. But what's happening where Nick's at reminds me of the old Elvis Costello tune, Watching the Detectives. You got Mike Tomlin, you got defensive coordinator Terrell Austin, and I believe Omar Khan is down there as well. And what these Steelers are doing, they are in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, which we know is an event Tomlin loves. And often the interest that Tomlin shows in players and the up close and personal interaction he has is a major tell for the shopping list that the Steelers go into the draft with. So what Nick is doing is a little like watching the detectives. He's watching Tomlin and the coaches watch the players and look for those special reactions and interactions with those players to see if Tomlin is telling us anything. So Nick has been watching practice all day. He's been tweeting up a storm. He knows the groups that really is catching Tomlin's eye along with the players. So we're going to go right to Nick to see all of this watching of Tomlin watch the players that he's done all day. What can you tell us, Nick? Who's impressing and who is Tomlin loving?
Yeah, I mean, the defensive line, guys, that is the theme of today. In addition to the people you named that are here, Arthur Smith is also here. So both coordinators, Omar Khan, plus Mike Tomlin, plus a litany of other scouting staff. There's at least 12 personnel members from the Steelers here, and that's no surprise. The Steelers absolutely adore and love the Senior Bowl. And so they're here. But the defensive line, Mike Tomlin was like in the defensive line drills at times today. And I mean that. Like he was standing in the drill talking to the guys. And so there were, I think, 3 or 4 guys that particularly stood out to me as options to look at. The only first round option, I think, is Walter Nolan from Ole Miss. He is a squatty, super explosive type. Mike Tomlin was talking with him a lot. He's a definite option at 21. Then later, kind of in the draft, you have guys like Deion Walker. Deion Walker is 6'7", 340. He will give you flashbacks to the good old days of a big nose tackle that can get his in there and really kind of clip up the run game. Super explosive, moves way better than you would think at 6'7", 340. He moves way better than he should. And so that's a guy to keep an eye on for round 2. And then I think there's other guys. Anais Peebles and Darius Alexander. I thought those were 2 guys that really stood out. TJ Stewart as well. Those 5, I think, were guys that really stood out today. And those 3 guys are round 3 guys. Peebles is a smaller type of guy. He's about 6 feet tall, really explosive. Stewart's pretty stocky built, had a really good season overall at South Carolina. And then you look at someone like Alexander out of Toledo. We know how the Steelers love the MAC, right? And how many great players have they gotten out of the MAC before? They really have. And so that's where they were looking. Arthur Smith, on the other hand, obviously was not watching defensive linemen. But Khan, Tomlin, and Austin were all watching the defensive linemen. And I mean, that's kind of without pause. Every now and then Mike Tomlin would take a peek over the defensive backs, but the defensive linemen and the defensive backs were practicing basically right across the field from another. Mike Tomlin was standing in the middle. He would just peek over real quick, but nothing crazy. It was almost entirely the defensive line. And so this, to me, is starting to put the clues in. I tell everybody out of Mobile, out of the Senior Bowl, I can't necessarily tell you what player they're going to pick all the time, but I can tell you what position they're going to pick. I've been to the Senior Bowl. This is my 4th time down here. 2022, it was apparent they were going to take a quarterback. 2023, again, offensive line was very apparent. And last year, same thing. It was very apparent they're going to go offensive line again. This year, I think it's quite apparent they're going to go the defensive line. But I think Arthur Smith being here is interesting. We don't always see both coordinators down here, John. That's not normal. Matt Canada was here when they selected a quarterback. Last year, Austin was down here, and we did not have Arthur Smith down here because he wasn't hired yet. But they brought Pat Meyer, who is the O-line coach, obviously. Arthur Smith being here means they are going to put significant investment into that side of the ball at some point. And I think where he was watching kind of tells you where it will go. And it's no surprise I'm going to tell you he was watching wide receivers. It's just not. Those are two of the top needs. And so defensive line, wide receiver, that was the top two things to look at today. Coming out of that, I think that's their top two priorities right now for the offseason. And so I will say that. And then I will say one other thing, the lack of quarterback watching. So if you were a big Jackson Dart or a Jalen Milroe or a Tyler Shuck or a Dylan Gabriel fan, nothing. They did not even pay attention to the quarterbacks today. So D-line, wide receiver,
Whoa.
that certainly seems like the focus of this scouting effort down.
That's going to be a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people. The fact that they seem to be overlooking the quarterbacks, especially in light of, and I want to talk about this in depth at some point, but the Art Rooney II press availability and all the things he seemed to signal, and one of them was that, okay, they want to keep either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, but not both. He both sees them as potential starter. But the corollary of that, if you're going to let one of them go and you don't know which one is expendable. So, I mean, he really sounded like an owner who knows he's in quarterback purgatory, as you've coined that term, but also doesn't know how to get out of it. And he's certainly in the availability, in your tweets that I saw, didn't rule out turning to the draft for quarterback, but you're thinking that that's off the table. Give me your analysis of what Rooney II said about the quarterback situation.
I do think that we could see a mid-round quarterback. Hey, there's 3 days down here in Mobile. It's not like they couldn't pivot to quarterback watching, but generally Mike Tomlin and that staff have kind of guys they like. But I think Rooney gave a very specific statement that set up what I talked about last week, which was, okay, one of Justin Fields or Russell Wilson will be back. I think it's going to be Justin Fields for the reason we have discussed. And then maybe a mid-round quarterback. If you watch the national championship, maybe a Will Howard. I think he makes a lot of sense for them. Maybe a Quinn Ewers, someone like that. Milroe, Dart, these mid-round guys. One of those guys makes sense. But I do not think they are going to be the answer at quarterback. And I don't think the Steelers necessarily think they will be. But I think the Steelers want to have some young guy in there where if things just fall apart completely, they at least have a young guy to turn to that, is an upside intrigue option. And so I definitely think they could look towards drafting a mid-round quarterback, but I don't think it's going to be a significant investment. I think third round at the earliest probably. Might be it could be a late round pick, could be a 6th, 7th rounder. Would not surprise me. But what this is setting up for, and what I think Art Rooney is saying is, hey man, we don't have a quarterback, but there's not really a lot of avenues out of this year. Like there just aren't, right? Top 2 quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, are going to go out of the range of the Steelers or even a trade up. Jalen Milroe might be a late first, but he is definitely raw. He's not really ready right now. Would the Steelers like to take him at 21? I don't think so. So there's really not a guy to take a swing on. I think the one thing, even though Art Rooney said that the Steelers didn't learn anything from the Kenny Pickett failure, which I think is very, very questionable. I think they definitely did. I think one of the things that they're going to learn from that is just because you need a quarterback, if it's a bad class, doesn't necessarily mean you should always draft a quarterback, at least in the first round. And what I think this sets up for, John, is next year in a class that looks deeper on paper. You talk about guys like Lenore Sellers, Garrett Nussmeier, Cade Klubnik, Arch Manning, et cetera, that are potentially coming out in that class. Drew Aller. There's just a lot of different guys that coming out in that class that are maybe going to be first-round picks. Next year sets up for the Steelers to make that move up the board where they can go get their guy. And so what I think the strategy is going to be this year is fill in the holes around them. Get that wide receiver, get that defensive lineman, get that running back, get that corner. Fix the team around them so when that quarterback comes into an ideal spot and ready to kind of learn and ready to grow. Getting that quarterback into an ideal place is really good for success immediately. I think of Bo Nix, for example, this year coming into Denver. Denver, really good offensive line. They had the depth at receiver. They have a good offensive play calling. Things like that the Steelers are going to need for that quarterback. So I think this year is the draft, the offseason to set up the infrastructure for that 2026 guy where they take that swing.
And I think that is setting up perfectly. And we all know that the Steelers are hosting the draft in 2026. So if that's where they bring the franchise, that's where they get the face of the franchise. What more cinematic moment could there be than that? But the one thing that Rooney said that I thought was interesting as well, and it ties in directly with Arthur Smith and some of the criticism of his offense in year one with the Steelers, was that they want to align the skills of the quarterback. In other words, they want their quarterback room to be either a pocket passer or a runner. They don't want a pocket passer and a runner, so that if you switch horses, you have to change the whole offense. In other words, he feels that having Wilson, who was more the pocket passer, and Fields, who was more the runner, really muddled what Smith was trying to do, and it really kind of tied his hands and led to the unappetizing game plans that you were so adept at criticizing. What did you make of that comment, that they want to choose their prototype? They're trying to find the prototype quarterback that they want to go with into the future.
It's an interesting idea because the Steelers certainly did have two vastly different quarterbacks last year. And I do think when we talk about the Justin Fields packages, that's where it really showed up, right? There was no cohesion. And Justin Fields, when he was in there, John, was running Russell Wilson's offense in a lot of ways, right? It wasn't Justin Fields' offense. And so you want to be able to build that offense around one of those two guys. The Steelers kind of tried to build an offense that was just Arthur Smith's offense last year. I don't really think it was a Russell Wilson offense. I don't think it was a Justin Fields offense. I just think it was a generic, offense without really a quarterback in mind until later in the process. And so if you're Russell Wilson offense, you're going to want guys with jump ball experience. You're going to want a speedy running back that can game break. If you are with Justin Fields, maybe you want a more of a route runner type that gets yak. Like, there's different things. There's different things you lean into offensively. And so I think that's kind of what he's talking about. I think there was some frustration from Arthur Smith that he didn't really have a consistent vision for the offense because it was flipping back and forth, two vastly different guys, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think they want someone similar. So, okay, they signed Justin Fields. That would point more to Jalen Milroe, right? Or you're going to sign a free agent, Marcus Mariota, someone that's mobile, fits that. You sign Russell Wilson, it points to a less mobile guy, more like a Jacoby Brissett or a Joe Flacco or someone like that, right? And so that's kind of, I think, where this is coming from. It's easier for a play caller to build upon things when guys have similar strengths and weaknesses. It also helps your personnel guys into getting a receiver, getting this running back type, doing this. So it's just different. And I think that's really where that comes from. And so I can understand why there might be some frustration, particularly from someone like Arthur Smith, about that. So I understand. And I think that's kind of where he's coming from on that, where, okay, Justin Fields comes in, you need another mobile guy. If it's Russ, you want more of a pocket passer, deep ball type. It makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense. And, we had a split personality at quarterback, and Smith was left to deal with it. But I just thought it was kind of interesting and somewhat astute of Rooney to pick up on that and mention the fact that we need to decide what the Pittsburgh prototype at passer is going to be. And I kind of like that. So that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. I know you were watching the D line and Tomlin was watching the D line, but can you, since we know wide receiver is going to be on the shopping list as well, can you give us any color on what's going to be maybe Arthur Smith, what he's going to be watching at maybe that receiver position? What's down there in Mobile at the receiver position?
It's not a great group. This is not a super great wide receiving class. It's not a deep one, that's for sure. It is one that is kind of, I would say, top heavy. And most in those four first round receivers, talking Tedero and McMillan, Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, and Emeka Egbuka are all four not here. They are not at the Senior Bowl. They're not the Shrine Bowl. They're not at these postseason games. So none of those guys are here. There are a few guys that are here that are interesting. Guys like Jaden Higgins, Jack Besh, Jalen Royals. These are guys that probably go day two in that second tier of players. So what I kind of think you're looking for here is there backup options if they don't want to take a first round receiver? Because we have talked about the strengths of this class. They are really at the other needs position for the Steelers. This is a very deep defensive line class. It's a very deep running back class. It's a pretty good corner class. It's not as good of a wide receiver class. There are still some guys, but a lot of the guys that are also day 2, day 3 options are probably guys that don't necessarily fit the Steelers. Like, I don't think they're going to find guys that are slot specific. So, guys that I like a Xavier Restrepo, who's here, who's a really tough, solid slot receiver, doesn't really fit the Steelers. Like, why? They have 2 slot receivers. They have Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson. And, Roman Wilson does factor into this because even though he didn't play last year, he's basically like I don't want to say a free draft pick, but he kind of is like a rookie coming in next year where you get a new player into that position. And so you kind of have a slot option coming in already. So slot receivers are kind of out. That eliminates guys like Royals too, who's kind of a slot. And so I think with Arthur Smith, it's going to be looking for outside guys. So, Higgins is 6'4", 210, jump ball guy, fluid, that can run routes. Besh is a guy that blocks at a high level. He's a former tight end, and he can separate. Or the other kind of outside of this is you can find a pure route runner type, a guy that is just, kind of like Deontay Johnson, a guy that just runs really good routes. I don't think there's necessarily a guy here that reminds me of that type. Tez Johnson is probably the closest thing to it, but he is a different type of receiver because he's 156 pounds, which is a pretty big outlier for wide receiver position. So expect an outside guy, a guy that can block a little bit with some size, I would imagine, or a guy that can kind of do it all, inside or out. So, that would be a guy like Egbuka, who is not here, but I think has massive potential in an Arthur Smith offense. He only played the slot really in Ohio State, but that's because they had Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Marvin Harrison Jr., all these really talented players at Ohio State while he was there. He kind of just got pushed into the slot more than it was. He can't play outside. So that's the guy. Egbuka is the guy round 1. Golden could also fit that tab, but Egbuka's that guy. If they go round 1 receiver that can do a little bit of everything for them, but he's not here. And so Arthur Smith is kind of getting, I guess, the backup options, right? If you don't want to go Egbuka round 1, is there another guy that they can maybe go after that can fill some of that void if they don't hit something in free agency that they love?
Another thing, while we're on the subject of receiver, let's talk about our favorite receiver, George Pickens. Rooney really held out an olive branch to Pickens, basically saying, loves the talent, loves the potential, acknowledges some of the issues we've all seen with Pickens, but said that it's how you manage the player, which I thought he was directly talking at Tomlin. And we know Tomlin has managed some players with some egos and some issues. And he feels that there's a reason due to that extreme talent level that Pickens possesses to try to get him to grow that character and become that complete player that they think he can be. So what did you make of the Rooney being soft on Pickens and seeing that talent and hoping Tomlin can manage the character issues?
It's interesting. We always talk about George being this kind of enigma, and it's kind of what he is. But he is undoubtedly a very talented football player. And he has such immense talent that it's kind of going to be hard to find a guy like that in this class outside of, an Egbuka, a Golden, a Burden, someone like that in the first round. Because that guy is an extremely talented player. I think the thing, with Rooney specifically is, one, I think they don't necessarily have a perfect kind of bridge to the owner there with that situation, right? Just because, Rooney says that doesn't mean, one, he's not going to get traded, two, he's not going to get extended. That was a pretty lukewarm, comment, to be quite honest, from Rooney. I mean, saying he has room for growth, but he's immensely talented. We hope he does. I mean, that's pretty boilerplate. There's nothing like, to me, that really speaks to what Rooney thinks about Pickens there, other than, yes, he is a very talented player that could very easily end up being great for the Steelers, or he could be traded. So there's just so many different things to kind of read from that. And so, I think for the Steelers, when it comes to George Pickens, just because they're publicly not, going at him and just absolutely crushing this guy does not mean that they are certainly not questioning what to do on the inside. I think that there are a lot of people in the Steelers organization that are a little bit fed up with that situation. And even though he's really talented, it's going to come to a heat. But as we have said many times, John, on this podcast, they got to create leverage for themselves. That's the name of the game with this George Pickens saga. And so if they want to trade him, they want to move on from him at all, they have to create leverage for themselves. They have to get a receiver because their receiver room right now is George Pickens and nothing. And so you trade him and don't have a backup plan, you have nothing in that room. And it was bad with him. And so you need to figure out something in that room in order to really get going.
And I totally agree with everything you said. The one thing that interested me that, the comment Rooney made about managing a player like that, you know what I mean? And that seemed to think that Tomlin and the staff, let's work on this. Let's, I don't know if it's given another try, but it's like, okay, let's maybe try to develop a plan, or what's your plan for managing him? It just seemed like there was a little subtle message there about, hey, let's not totally give up yet.
Yeah, I mean, there could be, right?
Maybe it's just me hoping.
Yeah, I mean, there could be. I think with him, though, specifically when we're talking about George, that is going to be a decision made by Omar and Mike. And I think that's the thing. And so, maybe Rooney believes in that, but, Rooney is not really a meddlesome owner. He's not going to step in and tell the Steelers to trade George Pickens and or keep George Pickens. And so it really matters what those two guys think. And I do think there are some frustrations with George right now. So I do think that, Art probably looks back, at some of the jobs that Mike Tomlin has done before at managing players. He thinks maybe we can get through this. But as we've talked about, how is George going to respond if the Steelers tell him they're not going to give him a new contract? There's so many factors to this. And so I don't think it's a guarantee George is going to be traded. I'll say that. I think there is absolutely. I feel like a lot of people are kind of talking like he's a guarantee to be traded. And while I think that is certainly possible, I don't want to say that is absolutely 100% going to happen, because I do think there's paths to George being back, to them building something with George. I just don't think there's a path really for this year where they're going to go into summer and be like, George, we're going to extend you. And so I think that's kind of where it stands most.
And the one thing I can predict is we will be talking about it ad nauseum as it unfolds, because Pickens is an interesting topic of conversation. So we shall see on that. Now, the one thing about Rooney is, and I agree, he's totally not a meddlesome, hands-on owner. He's not a Jerry Jones, the complete opposite. But sometimes what he does say is a signal, and it does seem like the Steelers brass sometimes heeds the signal, because I remember when he said that the Steelers need to run the ball. And then we drafted Najee Harris, who now looks like he's out of town. I think what was misconstrued by that was we need to run more efficiently, not necessarily run the ball more. But again, he was talking about running the ball, and he believes a running is important to a team like the Steelers, who play outdoors in weather, in the AFC North, even as we watch, the aerial show among the NFL elite teams, that it's a quarterback driven league. And, we watch guys like Jaden Daniels get one step away from the Super Bowl. What do you make of the running backs that will be on display down in Mobile, and the Steelers' plan if Najee Harris does depart? What is the plan at running back? We could use a man like Le'Veon Bell again.
I do think the pick at running back, and I lean this way, is going to be one of speed, not patience, like Le'Veon Bell. I don't necessarily think so. If you're thinking more of an Ollie Gordon, Cam Scatabo, I think you're thinking more of a Travion Henderson, for example. So I think that's what they're going to look for: speed. I think they want to be a big play run offense. I think they want to hit explosives in the run game. I think that is a big time part of what they hope this team's identity is. And so that's kind of where I put it. I put running the ball efficiently at the top of the list of things to fix, right? Efficient run games can buoy mediocre quarterbacks. We've seen it happen before. We've seen, quarterbacks play more confidently when they know they have a run game that can get them ahead of the sticks. That's what the Steelers need. If Justin Fields can have his hand held a little bit and really develop his confidence, right? And be able to kind of get going, that can actually turn, Justin Fields into a far better player. That's how guys like Sam Darnold, improve. That's how guys like Jared Goff step up and they become better quarterbacks because it develops good habits. And so that's what the Steelers need to do. They need to kind of figure that out. And when we're talking about running backs, extremely talented class, John. I mean, from all different types. There are speeds types. There are power backs. There are patient backs. There are elusive backs. There are so many different types of backs. And, the Steelers kind of are lucky enough that they have one running back that I think is going to step up into the starter role this year, Jaylen Warren, that they kind of need some type of switch up from Jaylen. That doesn't mean they need Najee, right? They don't need this big power back, but they kind of need something that's a little different. And Jaylen, for all his strengths, he can hit the home run, but that is not his main thing. His main recipe is not home run hitting. It is the initial burst, the contact balance, the getting 20, 25, 30 yards through that, being a great pass protector, being a great receiver. I think if they have a guy that is a game breaker, and I think the kind of two things that they really look at, they want to be, the Steelers ideally want to be the Philadelphia Eagles or the Detroit Lions, right? They want a Jahmyr Gibbs. They want a Saquon Barkley. They want someone that on any carry can take the ball 60 yards to the house. I think that's what they're going to look for in this running back situation. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, someone like Jahmyr Gibbs or Saquon Barkley, because to me, those guys are unbelievable running backs. But I think if you're talking about guys at the Senior Bowl, a guy like R.J. Harvey, who's about 5'8", 205, really thick built, he can hit the gas and be gone. I think, when you talk about Ohio State, Travion Henderson, there's just guys that can hit that home run. And I think that speed is going to be something that they're really going to want. So that's the archetype of back I think they're going to look at, because I think they really trust Jaylen Warren already to kind of fill in the blanks and be the rest. But I think they want that game breaker in the backfield.
Hey, I can see it. I like it. And, there's a lot of cliches about speed, but they're all true. Speed kills, and you can't teach speed. So you have to draft it. So we'll see what they do in that regard. Nick, give us a little preview of what you're going to be doing down there for the next couple of days. I know you're going to be a great follow on X. You're also on Blue Sky. What you got in store? What you're going to be watching? As this event in Mobile unfolds.
Yeah, I'm trying to watch all the positions of need for the Steelers. Corner, receiver, running back, QB, defensive line. Those 5 positions really I am focused on. And then I think, sometimes you can notice a player. You can notice a really good tight end, a really good edge rusher, a really good guard, a really good safety. Sometimes these guys pop. I think what's great about the Senior Bowl is you not only get exposure, it's kind of like training camp, but instead of for, a team that you're covering, like the Steelers, for example, you're doing it for draft prospects. It feels a lot like training camp where you're watching a practice, you're watching them go at one-on-ones, you're watching them compete in team periods, and you're kind of seeing mano-a-mano, right? It's best versus best. This guy matches up against this guy. And you're seeing, I think the one thing I love about the Senior Bowl is, there's different models of guys. There's quick, small, fast receivers going up against long corners. There's small corners going up against big physical receivers. And there's the vice versa of that. And all these things kind of come together. And so you get unlike versus unlike, you get like versus like, you kind of get different matchups. And I think what it does is it exposes these guys to different schemes, different situations, and you kind of can start to feel where, oh, this guy would fit in better in this system. Or, if you're a corner that only played outside in college, maybe you're playing in the nickel for the first time. If you're an offensive lineman that was a guard, maybe you're actually playing center a little bit, or tackle playing guard. Defensive lineman, maybe you were a nose tackle, but now you're playing 3 technique. All these things kind of come together. And so I think that's really good. I think you also kind of understand leadership and intangibles better out of here. I talked to Jalen Milroe on Monday in the opening presser for the Senior Bowl. Quarterbacks. I think getting a feel for a quarterback's intangibles, his leadership, how's he liked in the locker room. I'll tell you what, I came out of the Jalen Milroe interviewing for about 10 minutes, extremely impressed by him. I think he's got great intangibles. So it helps me kind of measure the unmeasurable. I could sit at home and watch tape all day and watch all the guys and like their game on the field, but I can't really get a feel for them as a person without seeing them interact with other teammates, seeing them interact in the field, talking to them. I just think it gives me a better insight into the people that you are drafting. I think that's really kind of a big part of this process. I think that's why Mike Tomlin loves this. I think, he gets to see the interpersonal, the intangible part, the unmeasurable part you don't see on tape, right? I can tell you on tape that guy has good vision, good contact balance, he's fast. Okay, well, how's he kind of interact in an environment? How fast does he pick up on a playbook? How smart is he to these new looks? How receptive is he? All these different things, and I think that is very important. And probably the most important thing about the Senior Bowl, the Combine, pro days, et cetera, et cetera. Why the Steelers like to be on the ground is because they kind of measure these things. And so I think that is kind of the big thing. And that's probably the biggest thing I'm watching here outside of just who is generally impressive.
Hey, excellent description of just the insight that you gain beyond, like you said, just what's on tape. So we'll be looking for more of that from you. But I want to sort of close with a really interesting, I got a chuckle out of it. And maybe Steeler fans, now that the Super Bowl is set, will get a little solace from it. But it was a Kevin Adams with Barstool. He had this interesting take on the Steelers stuck in QB purgatory and what it all means in the grand scheme of things. He writes this: the Steelers don't have their franchise QB yet, and it's almost okay. Take the Bills, the Bengals, the Ravens, the Chargers, the Texans. They all have their guy, but they're wasting elite years because nobody can beat the Chiefs and Andy Reid and Mahomes. I've seen this movie, obviously Roethlisberger versus Brady. We didn't win too many of those, and it sucks. In other words, it's Mahomes NFL. We're all just renters, I guess. I don't know. What do you make of that? Of this idea that, hey, you can have a good QB, a franchise QB, and still not get to the promised land because of Mahomes.
It does. I mean, yeah, it's like that in the AFC. It just is. You have no shot of competing even with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson if you don't have a quarterback. At least it gives you a shot, because there are going to be years where Mahomes just doesn't crack through it. He is going to lose eventually. It has not happened in 3 years. At some point, there will be the first, right? There will be the first team at some point that finally eliminates Patrick Mahomes before the Super Bowl or wins the Super Bowl, right? And there's going to be a team that does it. And I think what you are doing is
Burrow and the Bengals did it.
Right. And I'm
Burrow and the
talking
Bengals. They were the only
right?
ones to do it.
Yeah. I think,
What's that?
I said I'm talking about since the three-peat started because it feels like that. They very well could end up winning the Super Bowl 3 times in a row. But yes, Burrow and the Bengals did it. But that's kind of what I mean, right? Just because, Burrow did it shows that it can be done. Just because Josh Allen hasn't done it or Lamar hasn't done it or CJ Stroud hasn't done it does not mean it won't be done at some point. It will be done. And so while I get the viewpoint of, you're not wasting an elite quarterback and years of that, I think for a team like the Texans, it hits pretty hard for them because when you're a team, your best shot oftentimes at winning that is on the rookie deal. And Stroud's on his rookie deal. And, eventually CJ Stroud's going to want that big time contract. And sometimes when you get that big deal, it's harder to get back. That's, I think, a key thing. And so I think that hurts a little more. But I think for the Steelers, no, they should want that quarterback because who knows? That quarterback could lead them to being that first team that ends up cracking the Mahomes code. And so, while I understand, saying, oh, Mahomes is inevitable, no team should think about it like that, even though Mahomes is having an all-time successful postseason run, just because he's going back to back to back Super Bowls, 7 straight AFC championship games. Like, it's pretty unheard of. But even the Patriots in the Tom Brady eras, they had gaps. The Steelers got to the Super Bowl when they didn't have to face Tom Brady. And so, even if you're the Bills, there's one year you end up avoiding Lamar Jackson or you end up avoiding Patrick Mahomes. That could be your year. And so you want that quarterback no matter what because you're either going to be the first team or in the year where Mahomes maybe gets hurt or something, or he's having a down year. When he lost his first Super Bowl, Mahomes' offensive line was so bad that even he couldn't overcome it. And so there can be years where Mahomes, despite being as great as he is not completely unstoppable.
I totally agree. And all things being, I'd rather have my franchise quarterback and let the chips fall where they may. So I totally agree 100%. And we will be following Nick on social media from Mobile, and we'll be joining him obviously next Tuesday to sort of pick his brain again, see what he has learned from all the up close and personal observation of both the players and Tomlin watching the players. And of course, maybe by then we'll be discussing some Steelers coaching changes. Who knows? But be with us for more Steelers breakdown all off season long. The big show every Tuesday. And until then, let's get our franchise guys sooner or later.